All right, guys, welcome back to the channel and thanks for dropping by. In this video, we'll be coloring good old Steggy here using my Quick Kit Vintage. If you want to follow along, just head over to my Gumroad page and pick up the kit. A template file will be included in the download. If you've already purchased the kit, just head back to your Gumroad downloads page and download the updated file. I'll have it uploaded to Gumroad by the time this video hits YouTube. I guess you can consider this to be my advanced vintage coloring tutorial. In the first video, I only covered the basics of using the kit. A few of you had some questions about how to use some of the assets included in the kit, so I wanted to address those while giving a more thorough demonstration this time around. Once you've downloaded the file, tap the plus symbol on Affinity Designer's home screen to start a new document and then tap New from Template. Locate and select the file, and you'll be ready to go. Let's open up the layer stack and take a look. At the top of the stack, we've got a group of overlays. You might recognize these from my first vintage tutorial. The newsprint gives us a nice paper texture, and the overlays help fade and age the final image. We'll leave those two off for now. Next is our color map. We'll talk a bit more about this in the next section of the video, but basically it helps us plan out and remember where we're placing our colors. Moving along, we've got our inked artwork and text. I inked this piece using the Rough Ink 1.3 brush included in the kit. I love this brush. It creates the subtle impression that the ink has bled into the paper ever so slightly and really helps give the artwork that vintage feel. At the bottom of our stack, we've got a composition grid which I used to sketch out and compose my final image. We might need this a bit later, but for now, let's turn it off and tuck it away into the background layer. Let's go back and talk about the color map. Color mapping is perhaps the most important part of this process and should be undertaken before attempting to complete any piece you create using these tools. For this demo, I'll be using my original color map. Each of these R2D2 looking code names represents a specific combination of yellow, magenta, and cyan, or yellow, red, and blue, hence the Y, R, and B. If we open up our Color Studio, we'll find a built-in document palette featuring the 63 colors used by colorists from the mid-1950s to the early 1980s. This period is often referred to as the Silver Age of comic coloring. You might recognize this palette by its other name, the Early Marvel palette. By tapping the symbol in the top right corner of the Swatches panel, we can put our palette into list mode. Let's see if we can match up a couple of the colors on Old Steggy here. It looks like we've got a light orange and an olive green. Because the colors are in their purest form, it might appear at first glance to be an odd pairing. However, we can see by their labels that they share the same base colors. The only difference is the B3, that is, blue at 40 or 50%. I intend to use the B3 to illustrate shadows cast by the sun. For this purpose, I believe the pair will work nicely. If the B3 is too much, I can always try B2. I'm also considering basic painting principles as I work. I'm using the B3 here because I want my shadows to appear cool in contrast to the bright warm colors of the sunlit Stegosaurus. This is just one example of the kind of thinking you'll need to employ if you'd like to build your own color map. Aside from color theory, it's a pretty straightforward process. First, let's select our background layer and tap the plus symbol to add a new pixel layer. On this newly created layer, you can experiment with the colors in your palette. Once you've decided on your color scheme, grab a liner from your kit, create another pixel layer, and start taking some notes. Eventually, you'll be able to settle on a color scheme work out any problems you encounter, and begin the process with a solid roadmap. Remember, aside from your inks, you're only working with 3 colors here. Don't get too caught up in the technical aspects right away. It's better to get experience working with the screens and gaining a solid understanding of how the process works before attempting anything fancy. Simply being aware of the basic DNA or YRB codes of your color palette is enough to get you headed in the right direction. Adhering to basic principles of color and light will help make your final illustration both pleasing and readable. When you're ready, let's get started coloring. In my previous tutorial, I demonstrated how to use the YRB plates to create any color combinations a given illustration might require. Let's open the Assets Studio and take a second look. Below the single YRB plates in the Layer Templates and Utilities section, there are some compound plates that you can use to save valuable time. Let's insert our yellow layer template. To do this, just tap once and then tap Insert once the menu option appears. Then, select your Move tool. Click, hold, and drag it so that it snaps to center. If you're not seeing the red and green snapping indicators, just head over to the bottom left corner of your interface and make sure your snapping is turned on. Now, navigate back to the layer stack. Drag and place the yellows just below the inks and text layer. Then collapse the layer. The text and circle are there to make the utility visible while still in the Assets panel, but also serve to remind you of the layer mode required for the plate to blend properly. Let's get rid of these and take a look at our plates. As you can see, each plate has a mask layer which has been filled with black. Disabling these masks reveals each plate. Now, remember, when working with masks, white reveals and black conceals. Keeping that in mind, there are all kinds of ways we can edit our masks so that our yellows come through exactly where we want them. Let's grab our paintbrush tool, select some white from our color studio, and choose a brush to color with. I'll go with my Flats and Masks brush to demonstrate. The first and most obvious method we can use is to color directly onto the mask with our brush tool. We can also use our freehand selection tools to create drop zones which we can flood using our Flood Fill tool. Once the selection has been flooded, use one finger to press and hold on the selection, then choose Deselect from the pop-up menu and continue on. If you want to erase something you've done or reconceal the yellow, simply switch over to black and paint over the area you wish to conceal. If the area is isolated, you can also safely do this with the Flood Fill tool. In the spirit of our forerunners, let's endeavor to save a little more time. Tap on the freehand selection tool to bring up the menu and select the rectangular marquee tool. With this tool, we can quickly create a drop zone that covers the entire area requiring pure yellow, or Y, and then use the Flood Fill tool to quickly fill the area. Don't worry about covering Steggy's legs. Any edits we need to make can be done quickly and easily using any of the techniques I showed you just a moment ago. With the freehand selection tool, you can also select and cut things to remove them. This operation does not affect the black fill on the mask, but rather removes the white from the pixel layer. This is another great way to get rid of any small mistakes or overflow. Let's move on to the Y3 plate. I'll use the freehand selection tool to quickly knock that out. Now that we've finished our Y3 section, let's add a little vintage charm. Let's collapse our layer, select it, and then open up our Transform Studio. By dragging the X value to the left, we can create the illusion of a mechanical printing anomaly. A little reading on the topic reveals that, more than occasionally, these types of things were done on purpose to achieve special effects, such as rim lighting. I'll post some links to some great resources you can use to research this stuff whenever you get the time. All right, we're almost ready to wrap it up. Let's go ahead and knock out that Y2. There, all done. Before moving on, let's take a snapshot to preserve our work. Open up your History Studio and then the Snapshot panel. Tap the plus sign to add a new snapshot. It's always a good idea to take snapshots before doing anything destructive. You see, now that all of our yellow values are present, I'm going to collapse the layer and rasterize it, consolidating the 3 plates into one. And there we are. Now, we simply need to repeat this process for our reds and our blues. Let's tackle the reds just like we did the yellows. We only have a little bit of pure red in this piece, so I'll take care of that right away. However, we have quite a bit of R3 on those spines. Let's use my rough masking brush for this one. This brush is designed so that the edges of the brush strokes look faded and splattery. If you want a stronger fade and splatter, you can adjust the strength by adjusting the brush settings. Once again, we'll shift the number 3 plate over to the left just a tad to create that rim light effect we talked about earlier. Now, let's knock out the R2 using the freehand selection tool and fill tool. All right, looks good. Now that all my reds are down, I'll just grab a brush and do a little cleanup. Oops. Looks like I missed a spot of pure yellow here. That's not a problem. I'll just head back to my yellow layer and paint it in. Again, just using some black here to conceal the parts that I don't need. Next, we'll tackle these horizontal red lines. First, let's add a new pixel layer. We don't need to set the layer mode as there is nothing in the sky which the red's usual linear burn mode will darken. Then we'll grab our 0 degree halftone line brush and a little magenta and go to work. Wait a minute. Looks like I covered up Steggy's eye. No worries, that's an easy fix. Using lines instead of dots, we can imply certain features or characteristics about our scene. My idea was to imply that there was a direction that the wind was blowing. Maybe it's slowly pushing the clouds forward against Steggy. Simultaneously, I sought to create purplish shadows on the back sides of the clouds. I was imagining that the sun was at a low angle. Maybe old Steggy's headed towards the sunset, and maybe those purples are starting to slowly creep into the sky. You know, the more I look at this, the more I don't like it. I don't think it'll look right once the blue goes down. Let's get rid of it. Okay, everything looks good. Let's take a snapshot, rasterize, and move on to the blues. Well, we're almost there, guys. Let's insert a blue plate template and get to it. The mountain ranges closest to the viewer are the only things in the picture that require pure blue. Let's go ahead and knock those out. We've got quite a bit of work to do with the B3 plate. Let's tackle the mountain ranges and the shadows on the grass first, then we'll sort out the shading on Old Steggy here. Now, the shadows we want to create here shouldn't have hard edges. We want to emphasize Steggy's rough and bumpy looking skin. Long, hard edges would destroy the texture we've conveyed with our ink lines, so let's let the ink lines guide us. Let's grab our ink brush and try to mimic the short, crescent strokes that give us that nice, bumpy texture. Man, looks like old Steggy here's got it made in the shade. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Jurassic Park. Now, let's take care of that B2. Since it mostly covers the grass, let's use the same technique we used with the pure yellow. Again, don't worry about good old Steggy, he'll be fine. We can always come back and conceal what we don't need. Now let's zoom in and take care of the parts we missed. Alright, let's take care of this sky. Just like with the horizontal lines in the clouds, I wanted to use a Ben-Day type technique to break up the composition and create a contrast to the dots that make up the bulk of the image. I also want the red and blue to play off of each other and blend slightly, so I decided early on, as you can see from my color map, to go with 45-degree lines. We'll need to add a new pixel layer for this part, but just like we've done with other larger areas, we can draw out a large drop zone with the marquee tool and simply fill it in. We're not working with a mask on this layer, so we can just go in and erase what we don't need. Just like with Steggy's skin, try to use circular motions with your eraser when dealing with the clouds. We want to emphasize the fluffiness. All right, guys, we've just got to do a little cleanup, take a snapshot, and don't forget to set that layer mode back to multiply after you rasterize. Included in the Quick Kit Vintage are a couple of texture assets specifically designed to help us make our inks look faded and worn. Let's select one, insert it, and snap it to center. By adding an adjustment layer, we can easily adjust the brightness and contrast of the texture in order to dull the blackness of the layer. We want the illustration to look like it was plucked from a really old comic book or newspaper. When you're satisfied, group the adjustment layer with the texture layer. This will ensure that the adjustment layer's effect is limited to the layer just below it. Now, let's move this group just below our inks and text layer. Some of you might remember this part from my first vintage coloring tutorial. We need to get the final inks into one of the masks. We can delete the unused one as it's only there for utility and backup. Now let's enable our mask and label our new group. If we take a look inside our inks and text layer, we'll see our text box and final inks. Let's grab the white background from the text box group, drag it out, and place it just above the blue layer in the layer stack. Next, let's go back to our inks and text layer and add an invert adjustment to the group. Now we can nest this layer group inside of the textures layer mask. The white will reveal the texture beneath the mask, and our inks will have that subtle, faded, and grimy look we're after. You can also use the brightness and contrast adjustment to further dull the texture if you like. And that's it for the inks. Looking the piece over, I started thinking that I'd like to play with the light just a bit. How about we put some sun on those mountains in the distance by masking a bit of the blue? Looks like we've come full circle, guys. Let's go back and turn on those overlays we disabled when we first got started, and we'll call it a day. All right, guys, that's going to do it for this one. I hope that you had fun. I hope you were able to learn something, and I hope I was able to answer a few of those questions that came in about the layer templates and how to use the kit in general. To all of you guys who have been supporting me in some way online, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I'll keep doing my best to improve the quality of my videos and my brush kits and what have you, and I hope that you guys will just keep coming back and checking them out. As always, guys, stay positive, keep working hard, take care of your family and friends, and yeah, we'll see you out there. Cheers.